Philosophers and the public. Christian Europe was strongly attached to their traditional beliefs because of the religious revival in the first half of the 18th century. Philosophers were the intellectuals of the Enlightenment. They believed that common people were lesser. Baron de Montesquieu was one of the most influential philosophers. He wrote the Persian Letters and believed in separation of powers in the government. Another philosopher was Voltaire, who wrote The Age of Louis XIV and believed in freedom of religion and expression. The Enlightenment reached its height in France for three reasons. First, French was the language of the educated elite. Second, religious orthodoxy was weakest in France, so philosophers had more freedom to write. Third, France was the wealthiest country. One accomplishment of the Enlightenment was the writing of the first ever encyclopedia. The later Enlightenment. After 1770, the philosophers began to disagree with each other's beliefs. One later Enlightenment thinker was Rousseau. He wrote The Social Contract. His main belief was in the general will, which he said reflected the common interest of the people, not necessarily the majority. Urban culture and public opinion. In the 18th century, the number of books produced increased dramatically as literacy increased. The number of religious books and books published legally declined. Instead, people began reading catalogs, pornographic works, fictional stories about the royalty, and other pleasure reading. The philosophers shared information in elite gatherings called salons. Wealthy women hosted these in their parlors to talk about philosophical ideas. Frederick the Great of Prussia. Frederick the Great came to power in Prussia after Frederick William I. After Maria Theresa came to power over the Habsburg land, he invaded Silesia, thus starting the 7 Years' War, which lasted from 1756 to 1763. He established freedom of religion, allowed people to believe whatever philosophical views they wanted, improved schools, and allowed scholars to publish their findings. As enlightened as he seemed to be, he did not abolish serfdom or change the social structure in Prussia. He also vehemently opposed emancipation of the Jews. Catherine the Great of Russia. Catherine the Great's main goal was to sophisticate Russia. She brought in foreign professionals to advance architecture, art, and music. She also put in place a series of domestic reforms. First, she restricted torture. Second, Catherine allowed a limited amount of religious tolerance. Third, she improved education and local governments. All of her enlightened changes were counteracted by Pugachev's rebellion. This rebellion was a peasant revolt. The revolt backfired because Catherine the Great gave the nobles absolute control of the serfs once again. She extended serfdom and freed nobles from taxes and state service to prevent another rebellion. Catherine the Great's second major goal was territorial expansion. She subjugated the last descendants of the Mongols and the Crimean Tatars. She also participated in the partition of Poland, in which Prussia, Austria, and Russia each took a part of Poland for themselves. Joseph II of Austria. Joseph II was one of the most enlightened rulers in this period. He completely controlled and established the Catholic Church in Austria. He granted religious tolerance and civic rights to to all people of different religions. He abolished serfdom. After Joseph II's early death, King Leopold II came to power. Unfortunately, all of Joseph II's reforms were undone because the economy was suffering terribly. King Leopold II reinstated serfdom. Absolutism in France. When Louis XIV died, Louis XV came to power. The parliaments, which gave the people the right to evaluate laws before making them official, were reinstated. The finance minister declared a 5% tax increase for all classes to pay for the War of the Austrian Succession. This caused problems because no one wanted to pay. The public used the recently reinstated parliaments to stop the new tax. More economic problems followed because the war debts needed to be paid. Louis XV cared more about his personal matters than the judicial opposition he faced, and he did little to resolve these problems. Instead, he appointed a new chancellor, René de Maupeou. Maupeou abolished the parliaments and kicked out all the old members of the Parliament of Paris. He created a new parliament and taxed the rich. Louis XV lost popularity because of Maupeou's changes, but he died soon after. The next king was Louis XVI. He dismissed Maupeou and reinstated the parliaments. For this, he was well liked until financial crisis began. The overall influence of the Enlightenment. In France, the royal authority was criticized and there was judicial opposition. In contrast, the rulers of Eastern Europe were well liked. They claimed to rule by the Enlightenment. These rulers encouraged and spread the cultural values of the Enlightenment by supporting knowledge, education, and the arts. They also wanted to strengthen their states to become influential countries. The Enlightenment was a period that stressed more freedoms for the general public, and certain monarchs like Frederick the Great, Catherine the Great, and Joseph II tried to address the will of the public as enlightened, absolute monarchs.